6 years after their bitter divorce, a successful millionaire stood frozen in the doorway of a charity gala, his champagne glass trembling in his hand, as he locked eyes with a 5-year-old boy who wore his face like a mirror reflection from 3 decades ago. The child's emerald green eyes, identical to his own, seemed to pierce through the crowd of elegant attendees, through the years of separation, through every wall he had built around his heart, since the day his marriage fell apart. Stay with me, because what unfolds next will shake everything you thought you knew about love, loss, and the secrets that bind families together in ways we never imagine. The ballroom was magnificent that evening, crystal chandeliers casting golden light across marble floors, the city's elite mingling in their finest attire, champagne flowing like rivers of liquid starlight. He had attended hundreds of these events over the years, each one blending into the next in a blur of networking and obligatory small talk. But tonight was different. Tonight, the universe had orchestrated a collision he never saw coming. The boy stood beside a woman in an elegant navy dress, holding her hand with the trusting grip only small children possess. And that woman, even from across the room, even after 6 years of trying to forget her face, was unmistakably his ex-wife. His heart hammered against his ribs like a prisoner demanding freedom. How had he not known? How had no one told him? The mathematics alone made his head spin. 5 years old, which meant conception would have happened right around the time of their final explosive arguments, those last terrible months when their marriage was disintegrating like paper in flames. He remembered those days with painful clarity. The accusations, the mistrust, the way she had looked at him with eyes that once held infinite love but had turned cold as winter stone. She had believed he was having an affair with his business partner, a brilliant woman he had known since college, someone who had helped him build his empire from nothing. The truth was innocent, their relationship purely professional, but perception had poisoned everything. No matter how many times he explained, no matter how much evidence he provided, the seed of doubt had taken root in her heart and grown into an impenetrable forest between them. They had fought with words that cut deeper than knives, said things that could never be unsaid, wounded each other in ways that left scars on their souls. And then one morning, he had come home to find her gone. Half the apartment emptied, divorce papers on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker that still held the remnants of the last pot they had shared. The divorce had been brutal, lawyers circling like sharks, assets divided with surgical precision, their once beautiful love story dissected in cold legal terms. He had thrown himself into work, built his fortune even higher, traveled to every continent, dated women whose names he barely remembered, anything to outrun the ghost of what they had shared. But here, in this glittering ballroom, surrounded by the city's most powerful people, he felt more vulnerable than he had in years. The boy laughed at something his mother said, and the sound carried across the room like music from a forgotten dream. That laugh. He knew that laugh. It was his own childhood laugh, the one captured in old home videos his mother still kept, the innocent joy of a child who believed the world was fundamentally good. His feet moved before his mind could catch up, drawn by an invisible thread toward the truth he both desperately wanted and deeply feared. As he weaved through clusters of conversation, past tables laden with hors d'oeuvres and floral arrangements that cost more than most people's monthly rent, he caught fragments of dialogue, business deals being negotiated, political alliances being formed, but all of it faded to white noise as he drew closer to them. She hadn't seen him yet. She was crouched down, adjusting the boy's tiny bow tie, her fingers gentle and practiced, the kind of maternal gesture that spoke of countless mornings getting ready for school, bedtime stories, scraped knees kissed better, all the sacred moments of childhood he knew nothing about. Had she kept this from him intentionally? Had she tried to reach out and he had somehow missed it in his grief-fueled isolation? Or had she made a calculated decision that he didn't deserve to know? That the man who had supposedly betrayed her didn't deserve to be a father? The questions swirled in his mind like a storm, but one thought rose above all others with crystalline clarity. That child, that beautiful little boy with his dimpled smile and the cowlick in his dark hair that stubbornly refused to stay down, might be his son. His son. The weight of those two words nearly brought him to his knees right there on the polished marble floor. He had convinced himself years ago that fatherhood wasn't in his cards, that his legacy would be measured in buildings and bank accounts, in the businesses he built, and the lives his charity work touched. But biology, it seemed, had its own plans. As he stood there, 3 feet away from them now, close enough to hear the boy ask his mother if he could have another cookie, close enough to see the delicate gold chain around her neck that he had given her on their 2nd anniversary, the one she had supposedly thrown away in anger, he realized something profound. Every decision he had made in the past 6 years, every relationship he had avoided, every wall he had constructed, had been built on the foundation of a truth he thought he knew. But what if everything was about to change? What if the story he had been telling himself about his failed marriage, his solitary future, his role in the world, was about to be rewritten by a 5-year-old boy who shared his eyes? She turned then, perhaps sensing the weight of his gaze, and their eyes met for the first time in 6 years. The color drained from her face. Her hand instinctively moved to the boy's shoulder, protective, defensive, a mother's shield. And in that moment, in the fraction of a second before either of them could speak, he saw it all written in her expression. Shock, fear, guilt. And beneath it all, buried under layers of time and hurt, something that might have been the faintest flicker of the love they once shared. The boy looked up at him with curious, intelligent eyes and asked in a voice as clear as bells, "Mommy, who is this man? Why is he looking at us like that?" The question hung in the air like suspended animation, freezing time itself in that glittering ballroom where hundreds of people continued their conversations, oblivious to the seismic shift happening in this small corner of the universe. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, searching for words that seemed to have abandoned her completely. He watched her struggle, saw the conflict playing out across her face like shadows and light dancing in eternal battle. What could she possibly say? How do you introduce a child to the man who might be his father, when that man doesn't even know the child exists? The boy tilted his head, waiting with the patient curiosity only children possess, that beautiful innocence that hasn't yet learned that some questions are too complicated for simple answers. Finally, she found her voice, though it trembled like a leaf in autumn wind. "This is someone Mommy used to know a long time ago, sweetheart? An old friend?" "Old friend?" The words landed like stones in his chest. Is that what they were now? Is that what 6 years and an ocean of unsaid truths had reduced them to? He couldn't take his eyes off the boy. Up close, the resemblance was even more staggering. The shape of his nose slightly upturned at the tip, the way his eyebrows arched when he was thinking, the small birthmark just below his left ear, identical to the one he himself bore in the same exact spot. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't his imagination running wild with desperate hope. This was genetics, biology, the undeniable truth written in bone structure and DNA. He wanted to reach out, to touch the boy's face, to confirm that this was real and not some fever dream conjured by years of loneliness and regret. But he stood paralyzed, afraid that any sudden movement would shatter this moment like fragile glass. The boy, unburdened by the weight of adult complications, smiled up at him with gap-toothed innocence. "You're really tall," he observed matter-of-factly. "Are you a basketball player?" The question broke through his paralysis, and he found himself laughing, a sound that felt foreign in his own throat, rusty from disuse. "No, buddy, I'm not, though I played a little when I was your age." The boy's eyes lit up with interest. "Really? I want to play basketball. Mommy says maybe next year when I'm bigger." She was watching this interaction with an expression he couldn't quite read. Fear, certainly, but also something else. Sadness? Regret? Perhaps the recognition that secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of revealing themselves when the universe decides it's time. He turned his gaze to her, and when their eyes met again, he saw tears threatening to spill over her carefully applied mascara. They needed to talk, obviously, but not here. Not in the middle of a charity gala surrounded by curious eyes and gossip-hungry socialites. "We should probably," he started. his voice low and meant only for her. She nodded quickly, understanding immediately. Yes. But not now. Not here. She glanced down at the boy, who had already lost interest in the adults and was eyeing the dessert table with the single-minded focus of a child on a mission. "Can I have your number?" he asked, pulling his phone from his pocket with hands that still weren't quite steady. "We need to talk about everything." She hesitated, and for a terrible moment he thought she might refuse, might simply walk away and disappear for another 6 years. But then she nodded, reciting the digits he quickly entered into his contacts. The same number she had kept all these years, a detail that seemed impossibly significant. Before either could say another word, the boy tugged on his mother's dress. "Mommy, I really need to use the bathroom." She smiled down at him with such pure maternal love that it made his heart ache with all the moments he had potentially missed. "Okay, baby, let's go." She looked back up at him, and this time her expression was clear. "Call me. We'll figure this out." And then they were walking away, the boy's small hand in hers, disappearing into the crowd of elegant dresses and tailored suits, leaving him standing there feeling like he had just been hit by a truck, carrying the weight of 6 years of unknowing. He made his way to the bar, his legs moving on autopilot, and ordered a whiskey, neat. The bartender poured generously, perhaps reading the shell-shocked expression on his face. As he downed the amber liquid, feeling it burn a path down his throat, his mind raced through 1,000 scenarios. Had she tried to tell him? Had she shown up at his office only to be turned away by his assistant during those early months when he had given strict instructions not to be disturbed? Had she sent letters he never received? Or had she made a conscious choice to raise the child alone, convinced that he had betrayed her, that he didn't deserve to be a father? The questions multiplied like cells dividing, each one spawning 10 more, an infinite recursion of what-ifs and maybes. He thought about his own father, a good man who had taught him how to throw a baseball, how to change a tire, how to treat people with respect regardless of their station in life. All those lessons, all those moments that had shaped who he was. Had this boy, his possible son, grown up without any of that? The thought filled him with a grief so profound it threatened to swallow him whole. But alongside the grief was something else, a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, purpose, the possibility that his life, which had felt increasingly hollow despite all his success, might suddenly have meaning again. If that child was his son, and every fiber of his being told him it was true, then everything changed. His priorities, his future, the very structure of his existence would need to be rebuilt from the ground up. And surprisingly, terrifyingly, wonderfully, he wanted that. He wanted it with an intensity that shocked him. Sharing these heart-wrenching stories isn't easy, but if you feel the weight of these hidden connections, of truths that surface when we least expect them, subscribe and join us on this journey. Your like can spread empathy to someone who needs it, and your comment might share a story that touches another soul wandering through their own maze of complicated love and family secrets. Because these stories, these moments when the past collides with the present, they remind us that we're all connected by invisible threads of shared humanity, that none of us are truly alone in our struggles and revelations. He pulled out his phone, staring at her number on the screen, his thumb hovering over the call button. It was too soon, he knew that. She needed time to prepare, to figure out how to explain this to the boy, to process her own emotions about their unexpected reunion. But every cell in his body screamed at him to call right now, to demand answers, to not waste another single second of potential fatherhood. Instead, he typed out a text message, deleting and rewriting it a dozen times before finally settling on something simple. "I need to know the truth. When can we talk?" He hit send before he could second-guess himself again, then watched the screen with bated breath, waiting for the 3 dots that would indicate she was typing back. They appeared almost immediately, and his heart rate spiked. Her response came through in 3 simple words that somehow contained entire universes of meaning. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. He stared at the message, reading it over and over as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something different, something that would make the next 14 hours pass more quickly. Tomorrow felt like an eternity away, yet also terrifyingly soon. What would he say? How do you begin a conversation that might completely rewrite your understanding of your own life? He typed back a quick confirmation, added the name of a quiet cafe on the edge of town where they wouldn't be recognized, where they could have the privacy this conversation desperately required. She sent back a thumbs-up emoji, such a casual modern gesture for such a monumental moment, and then nothing more. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked around the gala, suddenly feeling like an imposter in his own life. These people, his colleagues and competitors, his casual acquaintances and business partners, they were all still networking and laughing and playing their parts in the theater of high society. Meanwhile, his entire world had just tilted on its axis. He left early, making polite excuses to the event organizers, his mind already miles away from corporate sponsorships and charitable donations. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and late-night traffic, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only solid thing in a suddenly liquid world. Once inside his penthouse apartment, all glass and steel and carefully curated art that some interior designer had assured him projected the right image of success, he poured himself another drink and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, in one of those millions of glowing windows, his possible son was probably being tucked into bed, maybe asking his mother questions about the tall man at the party, maybe already forgetting about the encounter the way children do, moving from moment to moment with enviable ease. But he would not forget, could not forget. That face, those eyes, that laugh. They were already burned into his memory like a brand. Sleep, when it finally came in the early hours of morning, was fitful and filled with dreams that felt more like memories from a life he hadn't lived. Teaching a boy to ride a bike, attending school plays, birthday parties with too much cake, and wrapping paper scattered like confetti. All the normal, beautiful moments of fatherhood that might have been stolen from him, or that he might have inadvertently abandoned, depending on whose version of the truth turned out to be accurate. He woke before dawn, exhausted but unable to stay in bed, and went for a run through the empty streets as the city slowly came to life around him. The rhythm of his feet on pavement, the burning in his lungs, the sweat on his skin, all of it helped quiet the hurricane in his mind, at least temporarily. By the time he returned home, showered and dressed, it was still only 9 in the morning. 5 more hours to wait. 5 hours that stretched before him like desert highway with no end in sight. He tried to work, opening his laptop and staring at emails that suddenly seemed absurdly trivial. Market analyses and merger proposals and investor reports, all the things that had consumed his life for the past 6 years, now felt like nothing more than elaborate distractions from what truly mattered. He closed the laptop and instead found himself digging through a box he kept in the back of his closet, one he had been unable to throw away despite several attempts. Inside were photographs from their marriage. The two of them on their wedding day, young and radiant and convinced their love could weather any storm. Vacation snapshots from Italy, Greece, Thailand, all the places they had promised to return to someday. Candid shots of her laughing at something he had said, her head thrown back, joy radiating from every pixel. He studied her face in these frozen moments, looking for clues he had missed, signs of the woman who would one day leave without explanation, who would carry a secret that would change everything. But all he saw was love. Real, genuine, uncomplicated love. What had gone so wrong? He knew the answer, of course. Mistrust, miscommunication, pride. The toxic combination that had poisoned their paradise. He had been so focused on building his empire, on proving himself in a ruthless business world, that he had failed to see how much time he was spending away from home. How many late nights at the office with his business partner might look to an outside observer, even an observer who supposedly loved and trusted him. And she, for her part, had let her insecurities fester instead of confronting them directly, had built a case against him in her mind with circumstantial evidence and worst-case assumptions. By the time they finally had honest conversations, it was too late. The damage was done. The words spoken in anger could not be unspoken. The trust, once shattered, could not be simply glued back together, or so he had thought. But now, staring at these photographs, wondering if somewhere during those final turbulent months they had created a life together. He questioned everything. Had their love actually been as dead as he had convinced himself? Or had it simply been buried under layers of hurt and misunderstanding? Still alive, still waiting for a chance to breathe again. At 1:30, unable to bear the confines of his apartment any longer, he left for the cafe, arriving embarrassingly early, choosing a corner table with a view of the entrance. He ordered coffee he didn't drink, just watched it grow cold in the cup as he rehearsed opening lines in his head, each one sounding more inadequate than the last. And then, at precisely 2 p.m., she walked through the door, and time seemed to slow down like honey dripping from a spoon. She looked different in daylight, without the armor of evening wear and makeup, more like the woman he had married than the stranger she had become. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked tired, as if she too had spent the night wrestling with demons and difficult truths. Their eyes met across the cafe, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then she walked toward him with determined steps, and he stood on instinct, manners drilled into him from childhood, even as his heart threatened to beat its way out of his chest. "Hi," she said softly, and that one syllable contained 6 years of silence, 6 years of separate lives, 6 years of everything that had been lost. "Hi," he echoed, and gestured to the chair across from him. She sat down, placed her purse carefully on the empty chair beside her, folded her hands on the table like a student preparing for a difficult exam. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe hummed with quiet conversation from other tables, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups on saucers, the soundtrack of normal life continuing around them while they prepared to have a conversation that was anything but normal. Finally, he couldn't bear it anymore. "Is he mine?" The words came out more bluntly than he intended, stripped of all the eloquent speeches he had prepared, reduced to the only question that truly mattered. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, they were filled with tears that spilled over and ran down her cheeks in silver tracks. And he knew the answer before she even spoke. If you've ever experienced the shock of discovering that your life wasn't quite what you thought it was, that hidden chapters existed in your own story without your knowledge, then you understand the gravity of this moment. Subscribe to hear how this revelation unfolds. Leave a comment sharing your own experiences with unexpected truths, and hit that like button if you believe that some connections transcend time and mistakes and all the walls we build to protect our wounded hearts. Because this story, like all true stories about love and family and the messy, beautiful complexity of human relationships, is far from over. "Yes?" she whispered, her voice breaking on that single syllable like waves crashing against ancient rocks. "He's yours. He's always been yours." The confirmation, even though he had known it in his bones from the moment he saw the boy, still hit him with the force of a physical blow. He sat back in his chair, his breath coming in shallow gasps, his vision blurring at the edges. A son. He had a son. For 5 years, this child had existed in the world, carrying his DNA, his features, his bloodline, and he had known nothing. The magnitude of what had been taken from him, or what he had missed, or however this tragedy should be framed, crashed over him in waves of grief and anger and overwhelming love, for a child he barely knew. She was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe away the tears, letting them fall like rain on the wooden table between them. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. You have to understand. I tried. I did try." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth written in every line of exhaustion on her face, in the shadows under her eyes, in the way her hands trembled as she reached for a napkin to finally dab at her tears. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "From the beginning. I need to understand." And so she did. She told him about discovering the pregnancy 3 weeks after she had moved out, about the terror and confusion of realizing she was carrying the child of a man she believed had betrayed her, a man she was in the process of divorcing. She told him about calling his office repeatedly, only to be told he was unavailable, traveling, not taking calls. She didn't know that he had given instructions to his assistant to screen everything, that in his own grief and anger he had tried to cut himself off completely from anything that reminded him of their failed marriage. She told him about the letter she had sent to his office, a certified letter explaining everything, asking him to call her, telling him about the baby. A letter that had been signed for by someone in his mailroom, but had apparently never made it to his desk, lost in the chaos of a corporate restructuring happening at that exact time. She told him about the months of pregnancy spent alone, working 2 jobs to save money, her family helping where they could, but struggling with their own financial challenges. She told him about the night she went into labor, alone in a hospital room, no hand to hold, no partner to share the miracle and terror of bringing a new life into the world. She told him about holding their son for the first time, seeing his eyes open and stare at her with that unfocused newborn gaze, and feeling simultaneously the most profound love she had ever known and the most profound loneliness, because the one person who should have been there to witness this moment was absent, unreachable, lost to her in every way that mattered. She told him about the first year, the sleepless nights and the constant worry about money, about whether she was doing everything right, about whether her son would grow up angry that his father hadn't wanted him. Because that's what she had convinced herself of, he realized, that he had received her messages and simply chosen not to respond, that he had known about the pregnancy and decided he wanted no part of fatherhood. The truth was somehow both better and worse. Better because it meant he hadn't consciously abandoned his child. Worse because it meant that systems and missed communications and terrible timing had conspired to keep him from the most important relationship of his life. "Why didn't you try again?" he asked, not accusingly, but genuinely trying to understand. "Why didn't you keep reaching out?" She smiled sadly, wiping at fresh tears. "Pride, I guess, and hurt. After months of silence, I convinced myself that you knew and didn't care. And then, honestly, I got scared. You had become so successful, so powerful. I thought maybe you would try to take him from me, that you would use your money and lawyers to prove I was an unfit mother, that I couldn't provide for him the way you could. So I just tried to build a life for us, moved to a different neighborhood, used my maiden name professionally, kept us off social media, created a little bubble where we could be safe." Safe from him, she meant, safe from the man she had once loved more than life itself, but had come to see as a threat to her child's well-being. The irony was almost too much to bear. While he had been building his fortune and trying to fill the void she had left with accomplishments and acquisitions, she had been building a life around their son, trying to be both mother and father, trying to give him everything he needed while keeping him hidden from the one person who had every right to know he existed. "What's his name?" he asked suddenly, realizing with a shock that he didn't even know his own son's name. Her face softened, and for the first time since she sat down, he saw a glimmer of the woman he had married, the woman who had smiled at him across a crowded room at a friend's party 8 years ago, and changed the trajectory of his entire life. "Oliver," she said. "His name is Oliver." Oliver. He repeated it silently, testing how it felt in his mind, imagining himself saying it out loud, calling his son to dinner, cheering at his soccer games, all the ordinary, extraordinary moments of fatherhood that had been stolen from both of them by circumstances and miscommunication and the cruel randomness of lost letters and screened phone calls. "Can I meet him?" he asked. "Properly, I mean. Can I be part of his life?" She nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face, but these ones looked different somehow. Less like grief and more like relief, as if she had been carrying this secret like a boulder on her back and had finally been allowed to set it down. "Yes," she said. "Yes. He deserves to know his father. And you deserve to know your son. I should have tried harder. I should have shown up at your door. I should have done a lot of things differently." He reached across the table and took her hand, the first time they had touched in 6 years, and felt electricity arc between them, the ghost of everything they had been to each other still alive, despite everything. "We both made mistakes," he said quietly. "We both let pride and hurt drive our decisions, but that stops now. For him, for Oliver, we figure this out together." She squeezed his hand, and they sat there in that corner cafe. 2 people who had loved and lost and hurt each other, now connected forever by a 5-year-old boy who had his father's eyes and his mother's smile and a whole future ahead of him that suddenly looked different, brighter, more complete. They talked for 3 more hours, making plans, discussing how to introduce him properly to his son, how to explain the complicated truth in terms a child could understand, how to navigate co-parenting after 6 years of parallel lives. It wouldn't be easy. There would be adjustments and difficult conversations and probably therapy for all of them. But sitting there, watching her face as she talked about their son, showing him photos on her phone of birthdays and first days of school and Halloween costumes, he felt something he hadn't felt in 6 years. He felt whole. This was the journey of one soul discovering a truth that changed everything. But so many other stories are waiting to be told. Stories of love rediscovered and families reunited, and second chances that seemed impossible until the universe decided otherwise. If you've ever felt the pain of lost connections or the overwhelming joy of unexpected reunions, join our community. Subscribe to hear more stories that celebrate the resilience of the human heart. Share your thoughts in the comments about forgiveness and second chances, and remember that sometimes the most important chapters of our lives are written when we least expect them. Because in the end, we are all connected by the invisible threads of love and family, and the hope that it's never too late to make things right. Thank you for taking this journey with us, and until next time, may your own story be filled with the courage to face difficult truths and the grace to embrace whatever comes next.